The one thing that rings true with almost all of them is this very unique connection they have with a pet. And you think, well, I have a very special connection with, I'm talking about traditional pet parents. I have a very special connection with my pet. I'm sure someone's saying that right now, and you might. But are you with your dog every minute of every day, month after month for years? How many people can claim that? Most of us can't because we have to go to work. We have jobs.
Hmm.
That is the differentiator between them and us. And maybe they need to be working. They should have jobs. Yes, I get that. But when you spend almost every waking moment with your dog, you guys speak shorthand to each other. You know each other's movements. And more than that, when you rely on each other like these two living creatures do, there's just something, I mean, it's on such a high level, it's almost hard to articulate.
So, my guest today is Dr. Kwane Stewart. Dr. Stewart is a veterinarian and the co founder of Project Street Vet, a nonprofit that provides free veterinary care for the pets of people experiencing homelessness in cities across the country. His work earned him CNN Hero of the Year in 2023, and his book is titled What It Takes to Save a Life: A Veterinarian's Quest for Healing and Hope. So, with that, Kwan, if I can call you Kwan, unless you prefer Dr. Stewart.
Quan works great.
Kwan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Glenn, for having me.
Can I start off with an honest question? And I made, in all sincerity, I know we've had moments where we've sort of gone away from using the word homeless, and I've seen you use different words to describe it. So I want to be sure I'm respectful. What is the right way to describe people that are living on the street?
You're right. It's changed. It's even evolved in the time that I've started giving care
Hmm.
over these past 14 years. I still sometimes, to be completely transparent, find myself saying homeless. Uh, I hear some people use the new term houseless
Hmm.
because these people have made their own makeshift home on a street corner in an alley or under a
Hmm.
bridge. So houseless for some is more appropriate. Saying people experiencing homelessness, quite honestly, is a mouthful. So many times I just say unhoused.
Okay.
It's
Well,
unhoused. Yeah,
unhoused, or if we can use homeless, but know that I mean no disrespect for
of
it, just
course.
because it's in the common vernacular. So just before we press record here, you're mentioning you had 4 kids, and you didn't mention how many pets you had.
I have 4 pets. I have 3 dogs and a cat. So it's a full house.
It's a full house. Three
Hmm.
dogs and a cat. What kind of dogs?
2 big dogs and a little one. It's a husky shepherd mix, a purebred golden, and then a little poodle Yorkie. We're not sure exactly what she is, and then a rescue cat.
Yeah. So I don't have a lot of talents, but one of them I will claim that I have is many moons back when our first dog was small and we would take him to the dog park before I started not doing that because I think yeah, I don't know it's a cesspool for these dogs to get sick. But I could walk around and every one of these dogs I could look at them and 50% accuracy guess what kind of breed mix they were when it was more than just one.
Okay, that is a
I don't know
talent.
how we monetize.
I'm not sure I have that talent.
Maybe you should be interviewing me. I've yet to figure out how to monetize the talent,
Yeah, how to use
but
that.
there it is. There it is. Wow. So 4 kids and 4 pets.
Mm,
It's a handful.
it
So
is.
question for you just to start with. As a vet, what's the one thing perhaps that pet owners typically don't do that they should, and maybe one thing that they do that they shouldn't do?
One thing that they do that they shouldn't. Uh, wow, there is a bunch of things that come to mind. There's a list jumbling around my head right now. Uh,
What's like the most egregious thing you'd see
oh,
pretty
most
consistently?
egregious.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what the most common error is.
Hmm.
That would probably just make for a much better relationship is getting their dog some sort of obedience training right out the gate. Most
Hmm.
people neglect to do that, think, "Oh, I'll just sort of manage or I'll teach them the basics, sit, stay, things like that." But someone who doesn't have any wherewithal to teach their dog how to walk on a leash properly or how to
Mhm.
housebreak them.
Mhm.
Uh, some dogs just turn into a mess. Some dogs just they have this temperament or this energy, and unless you tame that very early, you're going to have a hot mess of a dog. And where that affects the relationship is, and I'll speak for myself. If I can't walk my dog on a leash, I'm much less likely to take her on a walk. Period. Right?
Mhm.
Full stop. Just leave her in the backyard. You pull, you tug, you jump on people. And so over the years, you can imagine how that one just creates more of an issue with your dog, right? It's just like this perpetual cycle. You're not walking, they have more energy, they tear things up, they dig, they escape, and you just spend less time with them. So I tell everybody I see, please, please, please set aside some money, $1,000, $1,500, call it an investment, and go pay for proper training. That's what people should do that aren't. Now, what are they
Mhm.
doing? What's the other? What they? That's what they're not doing that they should. Right? Does that
Mhm.
address that one?
Mhm.
Did I get that right?
Mhm.
What was the other half of that?
What are they doing that they shouldn't be doing?
Uh, what are they doing that they shouldn't be doing? Mm. Uh, what are they doing that they? You know what? I'm going to come back to that. Let that just float around in my head, and I'll
Okay,
spit out
okay, it's
some.
gonna float. We'll let it float.
I'll give you a really good one at some point during our talk.
Okay, okay. And by the way, now that you bring up the what they don't do that they should, therein lies my second talent. I am a darn good, if I do toot my own horn, I'm a darn good dog trainer. I'm the one walking my dog around the neighborhood. And I'm telling you, the dog sees the other dog being walked and she knows we're going to keep walking. I might, she might move the head over and just take a quick glance, but there's no jumping around, there's no pulling me off leash, there's no barking, there's nothing. And these other dogs are going, ape shit. And I guess it must be some technique they're taught because you see the owners sort of try to how do I describe it? Like distract the dog.
Hmm.
Like have the dog face the other direction and it like puts a treat in front of their face. I'm like, well, you have to do that every single time he passes the dog. That's not
Yeah.
really training the dog. So anyway, there you go. So I
Okay.
guess two
Well,
two
you
talents
have
I've
two
got.
major talents that have major play in my profession. We'll figure out how to, like you said, how to
All right.
monetize that.
All right. All right. Uh, do you ever deal with exotic animals or is that a completely different field?
It is, and the interesting thing about a veterinary license that maybe a lot of people don't understand or doesn't really come to mind is my license does give me legal powers, authority to treat
Mm-hmm.
any animal, come out of vet school, just 4 years of school, and somehow I'm supposed to have the competence and aptitude to treat anything from a dolphin to an alligator to a fish to a dog to a horse and so on. Obviously, we don't, and it would be impossible to think, yeah, I can just step in and not have much experience with horses and do a great job, and I can't. So at some point after school, you track or you do an internship or you just give focus to an area of species area, and mine has been dogs and cats my whole life. I did have snakes, owned a 12-foot python in college, so I took an interest in reptiles and I could do a little reptile medicine and a few birds here or there. But outside of that, again, if you put me on a horse ranch and there was some horse having distress or colic, I'd have to call a vet in to treat
Yeah.
it.
So on the note of horses, is it true that watching the Black Stallion as a kid was what originally made you want to become a vet?
It is, yeah. That was sort of the jumping off point for me. I was 7 years old and I played hooky that day. My mom allowed me to play hooky because she took me to see the movie, and I just remember I was transfixed, for that 90 minutes and crying and laughing, and it just moved me. And I walked out. I was holding her hand. I looked up at her, and afterwards just said, "I when I grow up, I'm going to be an animal doctor." I didn't really know what a veterinarian was at the time, but I knew in that moment that that's at least that it had that strong feeling inside. I think this is what I want to do the rest of my life. And that never went away.
And so just to take that, and I love when I hear these stories of somehow someone as a kid that had that kind of focus. But given the affinity toward animals, maybe empathy toward animals, I mean, you could have said, I want to become a wildlife biologist, maybe an animal trainer, maybe work at a zoo one day. Was there something about treating animals, something about medicine that you think when you look back that was the particular
Yeah, for
calling?
those that have seen the movie, and if you haven't, it's one of those classics. You should just go back and watch or rewatch. There's no, CGI and crazy. It's just a really moving story and the beauty of this relationship between the boy and the horse. But there was a moment towards the end of the movie where the horse is racing. It's in on an actual racetrack racing for the boy, and the horse has an injury and it's bleeding as it's running, and it's sort of showing this horse doing everything I can to win the race for the boy as it's bleeding and injured. And I remember crying in that moment and thinking, I want to be able to treat that. I, you
Mm.
know, I wish I had, or one day maybe I will have the ability to care for that horse. So that was it for me. I think the horse is suffering, and that really touched me. And I just wanted to have the ability to do that.
And at that time, or even as you would progress onward in your schooling, any role models you would look up to?
Just my corner vet, the vet we took our own dogs and cats to, that was sort of my hero. He was just working his mom and pop clinic, a couple miles from our house, and I can still remember the smell of the veterinary clinic and some of the staff and how kind he was. He had this wonderful bedside manner, and I just wanted to be him.
Because I'm assuming back in the day, maybe even today, I don't know, there certainly weren't like a lot of black veterinarians practicing. So it
Yeah.
wasn't, you're just sort of falling in love with the idea of treating animals. There wasn't any person that you were looking to maybe follow in their footsteps.
No, not really.
Mm.
And to your point, not if I were looking in the mirror, nobody that I could really emulate, I guess. But I don't know if that really sat with me, uh, or something I thought about much. I don't know if you're at an age sometimes where you're not really aware of your race or skin color, things like that.
Mhm.
So, maybe I was just in that period of my life. I don't, that came later, if I'm being honest. There was some moments in my life in high school and beyond where because I never actually saw a black veterinarian in my life, I wondered if this was a good fit for me or how it would accept me, the profession, which is sort of a silly thought, but it did cross my mind. But in the beginning, I just wanted to be able to do medicine and treat animals.
Mm. You mentioned that as a kid, and I don't know if it was around that same period or as you got older, that you were bullied quite a bit. Bullied for being pretty skinny, which clearly you are no longer. I think maybe biracial as well. Can you talk about that period?
Yeah, so there was a period of time we were in Texas, and this is where I saw the black stallion. I was probably 7, 8 years old, and my dad's black, my mom's white. My dad
Mm.
was a retired NFL player, and we were in Texas. He was coaching and uh, teaching, and so we had a few years there. And it was an odd. This is the '70s. I'm in my
Mhm.
50s now, so this is going back to the '70s. It was an unusual time, I think, to be biracial. You had kids look at you and not really, we're all looking to sort of put people in classifications or buckets. It's just how we process things. And I think
Mhm.
kids would look at me and wonder, like, what are you? You're not black, you're not white, you're not
Mhm.
Hispanic. There was a pretty strong Hispanic contingent in southern Texas. And, I just think I was an easy target to be teased, which, bullying was like an art form in the '70s. There was a period where it was just like, that's what you did. And you picked on other kids, and that's how groups formed and little alliances. And I just didn't fit in with anybody. I was sort of a target
Mm.
of many. And, I was skinny and awkward looking, had big buck teeth and wiry, crazy hair. And yeah, and admittedly, just not a very attractive kid. I mean, look at my own pictures and laugh at them. And
Yeah.
so yeah, there was a 2 or 3 years there was pretty rough.
Yeah. You said your dad was a former NFL player?
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, I played for the
so
Rams, early 70s. I was
wow.
born in 1970 and in LA. He played for that. Yeah, played for Los Angeles at the time. And actually, when I was born, he was off playing a game. I was born in October and he was off in another city playing, which didn't sit well with my mom. And if I can share something funny,
Mhm.
so my middle name is Kwan. I go by Kwan. It also is spelled unusual. It's supposed to be Kwame, Kwame, Kwame.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
dad was away. They'd agreed on Kwame. Dad was off playing a game. Mom was bitter, so she took what was supposed to be my first name, Kwame. She pulled it to my middle name, altered the spelling and the pronunciation, so I was called Kwan, and then gave me the official first name of Shannon. So my full legal name is Shannon Kwan Stewart. So just to add to the bullying, going back to that,
Hmm.
here's this biracial skinny kid with a girl's first name. Oh boy. I mean, just pile it on, man, because that's what it was. It was the little skinny, what are you with the girl's name. I'm still a little, my mom and I laugh at this at Christmas. We get together. I'm like, why? What did you? I had to suffer for 40 years, 50 years with that name, Mom. Why did you do that? And my dad would just sit over there and nod his head, like, I know. I told her. I don't know.
It's the first I've heard of the story of one going behind the back of the other. But you didn't feel any pressure from your dad to be more of a jock and do sports and try to excel in that area.
A little bit. I mean, that was dad's wheelhouse. From an early age, he had me doing push-ups and running, and it was just athletics. That was his bailiwick. Mom was academic. She wanted me to be a scholar and make sure I went to college and so forth. So it was a good mix or balance between the two.
Yeah. It's I asked this question and it sort of depends how self-aware one is. I was bullied as well as a kid. I always wonder how did that affect me long term? How did it somehow shape a little bit of who I'd become? Do you have a sense for, because I mean, it's easy to look back and say, oh, that was I was a kid and that's ancient history. But at the time you're going through it, it's your life, it's your world, it's your everything. Do you have a sense for, I mean, because I could see that becoming, and I'm not, forgive me for playing armchair psychologist, but I could see that somehow enabling a person to become more empathetic, knowing, what was done to them. I could also see it potentially creating like a deep rage
Mm.
inside of someone. What do you think?
I think you probably just touched on both, but they
Hmm.
came at different periods of my life. So, uh, yeah, skinny, awkward-looking kid up until maybe 17, 18. And I was a late bloomer on top of it. Graduated high school at 17, so I graduated young. And, I'm 6'3", all of 150 pounds my senior year going into college. So just sort of underdeveloped. But then I got to college and got into sports and started to look more like my dad through
Hmm.
through those college years. Bigger, stronger, and and then yes, I think some of those years of being bullied and pushed around when I knew I could defend myself, it came back. And it came back in the form of rage, as you touched on. And I fought a lot in college. And I would look for fights. And I would particularly look for fights when I felt like someone else was picking on the underdog
Hmm.
or teasing or making fun of somebody. And I would step in. I could be at a bar and see something go down with a bigger guy picking on a smaller guy, not know either of them. And I would
Hmm.
step in and tell the bigger guy, why don't you pick on me? Or why don't you push
Hmm.
me? And I found myself doing that a lot. And I think it probably did stem back to my childhood. And
Which you probably
over
didn't
time I let
recognize
that
at the
go.
time, I'm guessing.
I'm sorry.
You probably didn't recognize at the time that that's where it stemmed
No,
from.
no, I just thought, I'm a jock now, I'm bigger, and I don't know if I was ever reflecting back on those younger years, and I'm not sure that it ever came to me, probably until somewhat recently. Yeah, but after college, went to vet school and graduated vet school, and then I started my career as a professional, and I let a lot of that go. And then to the empathy, yes, I would say in my 30s, there were moments, many moments, that probably led to what I do today, where I just felt, yes, a deep compassion or understanding for people that were underprivileged or had less.
Mm. Did you find vet school challenging or did it come easily to you?
Vet school came pretty easy. Yeah,
Mm.
I just had an aptitude for science. I can't say that aptitude was as strong in other subjects, but science came really easy to me. And the 4 years in vet school was fun. In fact, I didn't have to study much. I had a roommate that liked to party, still a very close buddy of mine today. Now, 30 years later, he's an equine vet and from Kentucky. And we could have been two more different people, actually. He was in a frat, white guy,
Mm.
Kentucky, sort of
Mm.
redneck, strong accent. And he was the kind of guy I would look to fight back in college. And I told him that. But yeah, we became really fast friends and lived together and still are tight today. He doesn't live too far from me. But we go out and party too much. We'd show up like 10, 11 o'clock to class, smelling like Coors Light. And those were many of our days, but we got through it. And now we have some fond memories.
Oh, interesting. So you graduate from school, and I think relatively quickly you became chief medical officer at a, if I'm getting this right, at a regional veterinary chain.
Hmm.
And I don't know how long you were there for, but worked your way up and got to a pretty prominent position. And I think this was a clinic that mostly catered to well-to-do clientele. They could afford to take care of their pets, that kind of thing. I
Hmm.
imagine it was a nice job. And then you just sort of walked away to join a shelter, which is a
Yeah,
completely different world. What was behind the move?
I don't know, to be honest. Maybe some of that going back to I want to serve animals that aren't getting care. There was probably something deeper at the time. Again, I didn't really understand. It's funny how our subconscious and our past guides us many times, and we're just not even aware of it. But yeah, I had this great job. I climbed the ranks pretty quickly. I was only a few years out of veterinary school, and I was uh, had the highest position in this company that was running multiple veterinary hospitals and vaccine clinics throughout the Western United States. Great pay in Southern California, which I just loved. I grew up in Albuquerque in the high desert, and I just wanted to be close to water. I
Mm.
remember my dream was to be a veterinarian on the coast. So after I graduated vet school in 1997, that's a long time ago, I packed my old junky Mustang. I drove straight to San Diego and started my life. And yeah, I leaned in hard and put in the work and climbed pretty quickly. Uh, but then there was a point where I just thought to myself, there's these animals, there's animals out there like stray animals, animals that aren't seeing a veterinarian. Maybe it was thinking back to the black stallion and how I'm just missing a basket of animals that need care. And so I took on the role of county veterinarian, a glorified title for a shelter vet in Central California during the recession. It was the worst time to take on a job like that. Central California was sort of ground zero for the recession. It was already an area of high crime, poor education and so forth. And yes, and this thing that people have to remember when people are suffering economically or financially, then it trickles down to the animals immediately. And people are having trouble feeding their pets, getting them medical care. And so our shelter was just overrun with pets. I'll share a stat that is um, somewhat hard to process and uncomfortable to hear. But by 10 a.m. of most mornings at this shelter, and this is going back to 2007, 2008, we were euthanizing between 50 and 60 animals by 10 a.m. every day. I had a pretty small staff of people. So and it was mostly young girls in their 20s, I had to direct to put these animals to sleep. But between myself and my team, we were doing this daily, and it just started to wreck me. It's not why I became a veterinarian. And yes, I found myself getting depressed after a couple years.
When you're in that situation of having, and you're right, I mean, I can't even begin to fathom. How I assume these these animals that you're putting to sleep, they're they're generally fine. There's just not enough shelter to take care of them. So you have to, was there any method to the madness of figuring out what animals you had to put down? Or is it just like how long they had been there and they weren't adopted? And is it that kind of thing?
It's a few things like that. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a holding time. There's a legal holding time. I believe it was 7 days, maybe 10 days by law. We had to hold on to an animal to give it a chance to be reclaimed by its owner, if it was a stray, that is. Uh, and then space, resources, how injured an animal may have parvo, and its chances
Mhm.
of survival aren't good. It may have been hit by a car, its chances of survival aren't good. So yes, there's sort of an algorithm that I developed. But I was one who decided, which made it hard. It came down to me deciding who lived and who died. And uh, just over time, I was just walking around with immense guilt, and yes, I was able to justify some of it. And I had to do that for my staff. Again, some mornings these girls were crying because you're euthanizing a healthy 4-year-old lab that could have, potentially got adopted, but we just don't have enough space. And when you're overrun with dogs, then disease spreads, and there's a parvo outbreak, and then we're euthanizing more animals. So there is this sort of public health management piece of it. And I mean, it doesn't make it better psychologically, emotionally, but yes, it was our job to run the county, to keep the population low, to prevent disease outbreak and all these things that we're carrying around on our shoulders. But to do that, it came down to managing the number of animals in the shelter, which meant euthanasia is one of the tools.
You were pretty open in the book about a dark period of your life where you had become pretty suicidal and took it pretty far. Was this that period or was it some other period of your life?
No, this was just prior to that. I was tentatively diagnosed. This is probably 2 years out of vet school, so maybe 28, 29.
Mhm.
Tentatively diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's, and the unfortunate thing about this disease is during the preliminary diagnosis, I went in with some symptoms, some muscle twitching, and they did an EMG where they stick needles in your muscle to sort of measure it. In the beginning, it's hard to provide the patient with a definitive diagnosis, right? So
Mhm.
I'm there for the initial consult, and then there's a follow-up about a week later. And based on the test, he's saying there's a fair chance you have this, but I'm not going to be able to tell you for sure, Kwan, until about 4 to 6 months from now,
Mhm.
because it has to progress to a point where he, based on the test, can say, okay, yes, you have this disease. So too early on, it's just hard for him to say. However, once he threw it out there, well, you could have it. It sent me into a tailspin, to a very dark place. And for about a month or two during this waiting period, this waiting game, I fell apart.
Mm. What I think you had also mentioned that there's a very high suicide rate for vets in general, and, and not trying to be tongue in cheek at all. I always heard that the dentist had a very high suicide rate. What I mean, I can understand, and I get that period was maybe unrelated to this period of euthanizing 50, 60 animals a day. But I could see being in that situation of how dark and depressing that would be. But if you go away from that, I assume most vets, that's not what they're doing. Do you have any sense for why there's such a high suicide rate?
Yeah, I have given this some thought, and I think we do rank number one uh, for suicide amongst care providers. So if you take that basket of care providers, which is pretty wide in the United
Mhm.
States, and it's quite a bit higher than the normal average. Uh, I so someone asked this of me a couple of years ago, and I began to give it some hard thought. And I do have a theory. The the makeup of my classmates, and we had 125 people in my class. The makeup of my classmates was largely introverts. They are emotionally very different than I think just the average person you could pluck out of the population. We're sensitive or empathetic. I think
Mhm.
those are the ingredients that make a veterinarian, or at least the person that wants to seek being a veterinarian.
Mhm.
We're wired different than physicians, for example. I mean, you think about us when we're young and we know we want to be vets, like me. I just want to be around puppies and dogs and help animals. That's a very different person that's a kid that wants to just go out and play basketball or sports or hang out with his buddies, right? So I think at a very young age, we're just emotionally wired a little differently. So let's take this emotional person now who's now an adult in their 20s. You put them through vet school and now they're out working and they're required on any given day to take on a triage case of a dog that's been hit that doesn't make it, to euthanize a patient that they've been caring for many years. In some cases, I feel like I've raised these puppies from 4 months to 14 years, and on this given day, the family comes in and I have to euthanize the pet. And then that's at 9:15. At 9:45, I'm going into the next room, and there's a couple with a young puppy that is jubilant, and I have to just erase that sad face of this family member I felt like I just had to euthanize. And you're going through this emotional up and down all day. It's exhausting, it's emotionally exhausting, and you do this for years. It's taxing, especially to that type of person, right? That emotionally sensitive, empathetic person. So my theory is over time, you expose that person to that environment and it just becomes hard, becomes challenging. And there are moments where you experience depression, perhaps suicidal ideation. And I don't know. So I went through that. I have colleagues and friends who've gone through the same thing. And I just think it has something to do with you just put this type of person in this profession and they're going to experience some emotional challenges.
I think that makes sense. And as a vet, it's not like you're just triaging and then sending people elsewhere for very potentially life-changing prognosis. You're the one doing it. You're the one dealing with the dog that was just saying. I mean, in the world of human medicine, of course, if you think of a primary care, if there was something that had happened to you that someone was worried that you might have some kind of neurological situation like ALS, they're going to send you to the neurologist, and that's the one I assume gave you that preliminary diagnosis,
Hmm.
right? Whereas here, it's you're dealing with like the death, the mortality is constantly around you. There's no escaping it. So,
Yeah,
right,
you're
it's
not.
a daily exposure.
It is a day exposure, and again, because in a lot of cases, we feel an attachment to some of these dogs or cats we've been treating for a very long time. I've had moments where, like, going back to what I just said, I feel like I'm euthanizing my own dog
Hmm.
because I've just come to know it uh, so personally over 10, 12 years or longer. So, but I'm trying to be professional. I'm trying to comfort the family. But as I'm putting the needle in the leg and injecting the solution and watching sort of life leave this dog, there's a piece of me that starts to go too. But I got to set that aside and then move on to the next case in the next room and do this for 8, 10 hours for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, we had to put our first dog, our older dog, to sleep not that long ago. And I remember being in the room at the vet, and then the vet coming in once we were ready to go ahead and give him the injection because he was basically at death's door. And you could just, I mean, we're as a family, we were obviously distraught, but you could just see the vet feeling so bad for us. And I'm sitting there like, oh my God, they're having to do that. That's a daily occurrence, and probably
Yeah.
not just once a day. So I completely, it's not the sort of thing you can soak in as a kid watching the Black Stallion, but
No,
here you are in the reality. Even when you're removed from a shelter where you're having to deal with the magnitude of what you're dealing with, still you're dealing with death all around you. So I think I remember there was a cat in the shelter, I think, that you had ordered to be euthanized, but then you changed your mind at the 11th hour.
yeah, yeah.
It seemed like a turning point in your life, or one of the turning points in your life. Can you share that one?
Yeah, this is probably my first year into the shelter. I was at the shelter for a total of 5 years. And so fairly new. And this, again, my normal routine in the morning was essentially to go cage by cage. And yes, this one stay, this one go, stay, go. I had a red marker and I would just basically mark an X, a red X on the cages for the pets that needed to be euthanized that morning. And I came up to this, the kitten during kitten season, it's so hard. You have people are bringing boxes of kittens in first thing in the morning. We're talking 7:30, 8 a.m. They've found, out in a pasture or somewhere, that a lot of the kittens are diseased, they're sick, they're malnourished, they're already trying to die on you. Some we try and resuscitate or care for. They have upper respiratory infections, which is very common in kittens. So they're, the snotty nose and eyes crusted shut. And that was the case of this kitten I came up to. And I immediately just marked an X because we're just so many kids coming in. And I just know I'm going to keep the healthy ones and try and adopt and spay or neuter those. But the sick ones, I have a staff of 5. We have a budget that is, talk about a shoestring budget. I don't have the wherewithal to care for so many kittens. So I have to make a decision. Mark the X on this cat. I started to walk to the next cage, and remarkably, this tiny little kitten, it was tiny, it could fit in the palm of my hand. It was there just trying to breathe, barely breathing. Its eyes were crusted shut. But I saw it as I was walking away from the cage. I saw it blindly walk over to the food and try and eat. And there was just something about that. I thought this cat really wants to live. Because you don't normally see that. When cats can't smell their food, they start to lose their appetite and stop eating. But this cat it couldn't even see the food. It just wandered over and just tried to eat. And I remember turning to Brandy, my assistant, and said, "All right, don't do that one." So she pulled the card, pulled the X, and then I moved on to the others. And then I came back to it, and I just said, "This cat's going to need a lot of care. I don't have the staff to care for this cat. It's going to require round the clock care." And I remember calling and speaking with my girlfriend at the time and saying, I think I'm going to bring home a sick cat. Are you up for caring for it? Very sort of very objective, not emotional. I remember the calls like, are you up for it or not? If not, I'm gonna have to euthanize it. And she said, yes, yes, bring it home. I brought it home. And then I remember giving a speech to my son and everyone in the house. I said, look, we're not keeping this cat. We're gonna try and get it healthy and get it back to the shelter to adopt, which
Mm.
I didn't even think it would survive, to be honest. I remember in my head, I gave it an 80-20, 80 not 20 maybe.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, we got it, we got it. All right. So I said, all right, we have our mandate marching orders, and set up a little place in the garage. I had all the medications. We set up a timetable for when to treat. And yes, over the course of days, the cat started to recover. Finally, its eyelids opened after 5 days, and the eyes were blazing red. I didn't think it was going to have vision, so I just thought that was another hurdle. Like, all right, it's going to be a blind cat if it does survive. And then that cleared up, and after about 2 months, it was just this healthy looking kitten. And I said, all right, it's time to go back to the shelter. And my son started crying,
Hmm.
um, and I think, yes, I started crying. I was like, all right, but I was trying to act, I was playing the tough guy role. Like, nope, we're going to do it. We're going to take it back. I loaded up all its stuff, and I was walking to the car, and I was about to put her in the car, and like it got me. Took it back in. I said, all right, we're going to keep it a little bit longer. We ended up keeping the cat. Named it Sushi. Is probably one of my favorite pets of all time. Beautiful, beautiful Siamese cat.
Miracle cat.
Miracle, yes. Yeah, by all accounts, just a miracle.
Usually people are like dog people or cat people. You're like an everything
I
animal
was always
advocate.
more a dog person. She again, you
Mm.
talk about sort of a turning point, that restoring that cat's health and being so close to it. Never really owning a cat before, having a cat, that did it. And then she was just so attached to me. She was like a dog. I'd come home, she'd run to me, she'd jump up on my shoulders, and she'd purr like right in the corner of my neck. And yeah, I was like a sucker for that cat. And yeah, I guess that's sort of I became a cat person. More than that, it really changed my attitude on how to care for these pets in the shelter, and
Mm.
to do it differently, to not be so emotionally detached. There was this balance I had to strike where the empathy was there, the compassion. I would go up now to the cages and talk to them and pet them, not be so cold. I realized before I had to carry that part of myself so I could do the work. I mean, if you get too attached to these pets and you're euthanizing 20, 30, 40 a day, you're walking home. You can't do that. You won't
Not
survive.
sustainable. Yeah.
It isn't. So I sort of became cold, but then the staff started to sort of take that on. And it wasn't good for morale. So I was able to sort of come back towards the middle and be the vet I'd always wanted to be, turn it on and turn it off a little bit, but give these pets, some of them, their last moments there with us, like a kind touch, or, you know, just a few moments of compassion. And yeah, it was hard sometimes. I would carry it with me, but it was better for them, it was better for the staff. And I got back to who I wanted to be
Mm.
because of her, because of that little miracle cat.
Yeah. So at some point, you left the shelter, and I don't know if it was immediately afterwards, but you ended up with some what sounds like a pretty cushy job working for, I think, the Humane Society. And your role was to essentially make sure animals weren't being hurt on movie sets.
Yes.
That right, they were treated with kindness and compassion, and you weren't the trainer. You're just there to sort of observe and make sure that everything was being done, by the book, if you will.
Yes.
So uh, that sounds like an interesting job. And I think while you were doing this cushy job, after slaving away at that soul crushing job where you're putting these animals to sleep every day, I think on the side, while you're doing that, is when you had started to help some of these homeless people take care of their pets. So
Yeah.
just love to understand this inflection point in
Yeah.
the life and the career. Yeah.
This was the biggest uh, sort of new path or enlightening moment of my entire life. And it happened while I was at the shelter. Uh, yeah, so about 2.5 years in, I was going to quit the shelter. And I'd made the decision one morning sitting in front of 7-Eleven, stone faced. I remember telling myself, you're going to go in this morning, talk to the director and hand your resignation in. And so I was rehearsing my resignation letter in my head, sitting outside of 7-Eleven, which was sort of my pattern. I'd go to 7-Eleven for either gas or coffee. I'd go and get my coffee and go to work. And I was probably there for 20 minutes, just staring off into space. And it's all right. So I'm going to do it. It's time. And I wasn't, people should know this. I was, I was on the precipice of falling apart so hard. I wasn't going to just quit the shelter. I was going to quit being a veterinarian.
Oh,
I,
wow.
I had it in my head that I was going to just totally do something completely different, find another career path. I thought about being a fitness trainer. I was always into fitness, mainly because of my dad and college sports. And I thought maybe I'd just pursue that. I just had to get away from the euthanasia and the care part and the
Hmm.
emotion. And so, yeah, I just thought, well, all right, what are you going to do with your life? So I went in 7-Eleven, I got my coffee. I'm walking out, and to my left, there is this unhoused man and his dog sitting outside the storefront, tucked in the corners. You sometimes see him. And I turned to my left, I saw him, and for whatever reason, just walked up to him. The part I regret about the story is I'd seen him probably 4 or 5 times before,
Hmm.
but I just walked right by him. I ignored him. I turned to my left, I walked to him, I introduced myself. I'm a Kwan. I'm a vet. I see your dog has some sort of skin issue. And she did. You do this long and you start diagnosing stuff from like, it just comes naturally. Start diagnosing dogs from 10, 12 feet away. You're at the dog
Hmm.
park. You say, oh, that dog has this, that dog has an ear infection. So as I was approaching the dog, I already had a sense of what was going on. But as I got closer, the dog, uh, I could tell just had chronic fleas. It just had a bad case of a long-standing case of fleas, probably 4 or 6 months. But when dogs have fleas long enough and bad enough, it really destroys the skin. And this dog looked like a burn victim on the hind end.
Hmm.
The hair was gone, the skin was red and bumpy, was infected. And I just said, yeah, your dog has fleas. She's like, I don't know what she has, but she's miserable. I'm miserable. I said, if you're here tomorrow, I'll return with something that should help. So that took me back to the shelter for another day. I did not resign. Instead, I stole a $3 flea treatment from the shelter and I took it back to that man the next day. I treated the dog, and then I saw the same man, the same dog about 12 days later, and she was transformed. The
Hmm.
infection was gone, the hair was growing back. Before, she was sitting curled up and didn't even lift her head to acknowledge me. This time when I saw her, she was moving around, she jumped up on me, and I remember the man just sitting there quietly looked up at me with tears in his eyes during little moment, and he just said, "Thank you for not ignoring me."
Hmm.
Hmm.
Wow.
And
It's powerful.
yeah, I remember taking a knee, and I started to get teary eyed myself. And I remember telling him, "I'm going to find more people like you." It was just a pledge. I made it just a quiet pledge. I just said, "I'm going to find more people like you." And that was day one of the so-called street vet. That was the first day I started walking the streets and finding people like him. Now, how does that relate to Hollywood? So I decided to stay at the shelter for about 2 more years. And it was probably the best 2 years of my professional life because during that 2 years, I rallied the city to build a brand new shelter. The shelter I was working in was completely dilapidated. It smelled like rust and sewage and feces. I was doing spays and neuters, 20, 30 spays and neuters a day in this little tiny trailer, this cramped, hot trailer. But I rallied the city to get the funds to build a new shelter, state of the art, X-ray equipment, full treatment room. And during that 2 years, it wasn't just me; it was my staff and the city working together. We cut the euthanasia rate in half, and we doubled the adoption rate. And it was like a little beacon of the city.
Hmm.
It was something we were proud of, like a library or a brand new park, and people would come and they'd get their new family member. And exactly at year five, on the day, 5 years from the first day I started, I resigned and said, "I think I've done my part," and I walked away proudly.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's when I went to Hollywood. I said, I am gonna do something different, but I'm gonna stay in the animal world. And I moved from Modesto, California to Hollywood, LA, and I took on the job of overseeing the safety of animals on movie sets, which is a job. If you're a vet out there, it is a job. I didn't even know it was a job when I was
I was
dreaming
going
of it.
to be a vet.
It's a it's a job. It's the coolest job. You go on movie sets and you're basically a fly on the wall, making sure directors, producers are giving proper welfare to these animals. And so sometimes it means talking creatively through the stunts because directors have crazy ideas that I want to jump this horse over 3 train carts, and you're just the guy with common sense to say, "No, Spielberg," and I have worked with him. "No, that's probably not a good idea." And that's what I did for the better part of 7 years. And while I did that day job, in my free time, I would go out and walk Skid Row in LA, and I'd find unhoused people and their pets and give care, free care.
When you say with your free time, is this like a nights and weekend thing? I mean, how much free time do you have?
Yeah, it's afternoons and weekends. I didn't have a lot of free time. So I'd pick my spots, and some days or some months I'd go maybe 2 weeks without making it to the streets. And then some days I'd do it 3 days in a row. But and I didn't talk about it. I didn't share with anybody at work. I didn't share it with my family. People are surprised about that. For 7 years, 6, 7 years, I would go out quietly and do it and not talk about it. And people ask why. I'm sure you'd probably want to know why, and I'll tell you. I I was afraid that if I shared that I was doing this, I would be judged myself. That someone may say, like, "Why would you do that? Why would you enable these people that can barely care for themselves, even have a pet at all?" And it's a fair question. It is. I had that same question, or at times prejudice, before I started doing the work, like see an able-bodied guy panhandling with a dog, and I think, one, you shouldn't have the dog, and two, you should probably have a job. That
Hmm.
was the judgment I used to pass on these people, and I don't do that anymore for many reasons I could get into. But I didn't want to be at a dinner party, for example, and say, "Hey, Kwan, so what are you doing? Like, in your free time, what do you do these days?" And I say, "Well, I pack a bag full of medical goods and I walk around in these impoverished areas of LA, and I give free care to pets and have it turn into a thing." So I didn't tell a soul for the better part of 6 years until I shared it with my brother. And he just thought, "Dude, why didn't you tell me sooner?" And these are stories that people should hear. These are really inspiring stories. So he created this thing called Instagram. I was like, "What's an Instagram?" Profile for me, and he started posting the stories, and it got traction.
Hmm. Well, I know one of the organization's guiding principles is what you alluded to, with no judgment, just help. But it sounds like you're saying that you weren't always that way, that you had your prejudices going into this. And I'm the first to admit here, full transparency, I'm the same thing. I'll see to this day, I'll see an unhoused person on the street with a dog, and I appreciate. Obviously, I've got a dog. I appreciate the connection for an animal, but I'm always thinking like, oh wow, this person's out there all day as we're approaching summer here in the summer heat, and that dog could sure use some air conditioned house somewhere. And so I'm the first to admit I probably judged because I don't know any better. What was whether there was a specific moment for you, Quan, or maybe it was an evolutionary thing? What got you from judging to just acceptance?
There were a couple experiences I had in the streets which really vaulted me forward. But overall, if I took a composite, and I've kept loose track, I didn't keep very careful track going back to 2013, 2012 when I started doing this, but I've probably had one-on-one experiences with over 1,500 people by this point. We're 14 years later. I'm talking walking, stopping. Hello, my name's Kwan, just like 7-Eleven, and sometimes 60, 90 minutes with one person, getting to know them, hearing their story. Well over 1,000 times I've done this now. And the one thing that rings true with almost all of them is this very unique connection they have with the pet. And you think, well, I have a very special connection with. I'm talking about traditional pet parents. I have a very special connection with my pet. I'm sure someone's saying that right now, and you might. But are you with your dog every minute of every day, month after month for years? How many people can claim that? Most of us can't because we have to go to work. We have jobs.
Hmm.
That is the differentiator between them and us. And maybe they need to be working. They should have jobs. Yes, I get that. But when you spend almost every waking moment with your dog, you guys speak shorthand to each other. You know each other's movements. And more than that, when you rely on each other like these two living creatures do, there's just something. I mean, it's on such a high level, it's almost hard to articulate. And that is why these people will pass up on temporary housing. So I've met a guy who's on the streets for 5 years, living on a street corner, on the same street corner for 5 years. His golden ticket was pulled, meaning after waiting for so long, he was finally able to go into transitional housing in LA, but they would not accept his pet. So this particular housing unit would not accept pets. His dog could not go, and he turned it down. He had to wait another year until another one came up that would accept his dog. And he said, I will never separate from my dog. I'll figure it out. He passed up on a bed, warm shower, 3 squares a day because he was not going to be separated from his dog. I don't know how many people can claim they would do that. I don't know if I could say I would do that. So they rely on each other, they need each other. In some cases, this dog is a lifeline to this person, and they would do just about anything. Now, there are exceptions. I get it. There are people out in the streets who are breeding dogs, and I've seen cases of abuse, yes, but I've seen more cases of abuse or neglect in a traditional clinic. This will surprise a lot of people. I've seen more cases of that treating animals with paying clients than I do in the streets. So yes, that is why, Glenn, I become such a strong advocate for these peoples, because I have seen the bond and the relationship, and it exists on a much, much higher plane than the average person.
And when you assume some of these animals, you can just treat yourself. You've got a mobile kit you bring with you, and things like, oh, the dog has a bad flea problem, and like you said, there's some I don't know if it's a pill they take or something they wear, but you can deal with it yourself. I assume there's some situations that are more dire than that, and you need the help of specialists with other veterinarians. Do funds pay for that, or you need to seek the volunteerism of veterinarians to help so you can sort of scale the operation?
I need both. Yes, and for that 6 years I mentioned where I didn't share with anybody, I was funding it out of my own pocket, and it became difficult. So yes, just to give some people some context, out of my bag that I carry on my shoulders there, I have a kit that I've designed over the years that can treat about 80% of the cases I see. So I'm very familiar with what I'm going to see and carry the medications uh, to address those. Now, the remaining 20%, I have to get to a hospital. So these are things like, uh, chronic arthritis. It requires an X-ray, dental extractions or dental care. A tumor needs to be removed.
Hmm.
They have an intestinal obstruction that requires surgery. Just it runs the gamut. Anyone who owns a pet knows these things require, yes, in-hospital care. I would get him to a hospital and I would cover the cost. Now, again, when I was doing this out of my own pocket and I'm still paying student loans, it became difficult. And the hardest part was sometimes having to turn people down and say, I don't have the money to do it. Some months I would actually not pay my student loans to fund this little quiet mission of mine. And it got to the point where it's too hard. So yes, when my brother started the Instagram, we started fundraising, a GoFundMe. I had more funds, and that's when the rainbow formed because I knew for most anybody I saw on the streets, I would be able to see care from beginning to end, even if it meant a $3,000 procedure. Now, where it helps is vets that agree to do it pro bono, reduce their costs, and that helps immensely. Uh, but now, 4 years into the charity and 13 years doing this myself, and having a profile on Instagram, and winning the CNN award, we're fairly well funded, and I'm at the point now where it's rare I ever have to turn anybody down, and it could be a $10,000 case. If I see you in the streets and your dog, cat needs any manner of care, I'm going to see it through, and it really is a good feeling.
Mm. What's the long-term goal of the organization?
Uh, if if I can get into the 15 largest cities in the country in the U.S., that will account for about 75% of our homeless population. Right now, I'm in 6 cities. So I need to double that and then some. And we will cover remarkably about 75% of the issue here in the country. So that's the dream. It was once just me in one city, but now we're in 6 cities and 7 cities. I have veterinary volunteers across the country, have more offering. It's just a matter of me developing the infrastructure in new cities, and then growing the organization, and that's
Mm.
that's where we are, and it's fun, it's exciting. This is what's exhilarating. This is what keeps after 27 years of being a vet. This is what keeps me going now.
Yeah. You've met a lot of these people that are on the street, and I assume some of this is a little bit of a trust building exercise to know that you've got their better interest, their dog, their pet's best interests at heart. So they get to know you. I assume you've gotten to know a lot of these people and their backstories. So when you think of the unhoused, uh, anything about not the pets, but about people that are living on the street that you think would surprise most people
Oh, um,
in terms of how they even got to be living on the street?
yeah. These days, I would say a generation ago, you'd meet an unhoused or homeless person, and more times than not, it was probably drug related,
Hmm.
or there was some sort of mental health or illness at play. These days, my experience, these past 14 years or so, it's economic. And this is how it happens. And a stat will tell you this. There's a US Census that says we're about 3 paychecks away. The average American is 3 paychecks away from being homeless themselves, if not for friends or support or someone's couch they can sleep on. So here's how it happens. And I'm sort of just pulling a composite of many stories I've heard. And some of these people have college degrees, they have normal jobs, lose their job, credit goes bad. Uh, they they maybe don't have access to a friend or family member where they can go, or they're too prideful, and so they tell themselves, "I'll just sleep in my car for a while. I'll just do that for a week till I can get back on my feet and get my next job." Doesn't always happen. Then after a few weeks, the car goes away, and now they're on a street corner. And they're telling themselves the same thing. Hey, I just need a couple months to get it together. I'll be back on my feet. That 2 months turns into 6 months, turns into, in some cases, years, 5 or 6 years. Now your credit's destroyed. Even if you had a job, it's hard to get an apartment, and you're just stuck in this purgatory. And you know, I again, transparently, I'll tell you, if I was in that position and I'm around sort of a culture of people who are coping with alcohol or drugs or marijuana, I might turn to that myself. I might be someone who drinks casually. I find myself in my car, then on the street corner. You know, to cope or to get by, I start drinking, and the drinking turns into heavy drinking, or maybe I turn to a drug. So the whole chicken or the egg, these days, it feels to me like it's economic, leads to the streets. That issue leads to other coping mechanisms like substance abuse or alcohol. And now you're just stuck in the storm, trying to claw your way out sometimes for years.
In often cases, I assume these were pets of these people before they became homeless.
Probably, yeah, it's probably split. My experience down the middle, 50-50. Some of them have pets, some of them acquire pets in the streets because being lonely is difficult. You want
Mm,
a companion. There's a lot of women on the streets, and the protection or just having an alarm system is
mm,
helpful. So some of these people just find pets on the streets or go to a rescue organization and grab a dog, sometimes a dog that was going to be euthanized. So remember that for anyone listening now, some of these people on the streets have actually saved these dogs or saved this pet that may have been euthanized or was a stray or not eating or malnourished. And they take it on, say, you're mine now, which is
mm.
pretty admirable.
It's incredibly admirable. Well, I think I read somewhere, Quan, that when something's worrying you and you're anxious about something, that you can take this, I think you called it a 50,000 year view in the sense of, will anyone really care 50,000 years from now? Is that really a perspective that you have?
Sometimes.
Because, yeah.
Yeah, if and someone may want to try this sometimes, it works for me, but if you're finding yourself getting anxious or too concerned or worried, we all get caught up in these moments where you just start to catastrophize something, right? A lot of times you're projecting out to something that usually doesn't happen. But in the moment, it's like, I'm going to lose my job. And if I lose my job, this is going to happen. Or it could be a relationship and before you know it, you're like 3 years down the road and I don't know, you're dying on your deathbed or you're homeless yourself. And, for those moments, I take a breath and say, you know what, really, is any of this going to matter 50,000 years
Mm,
from now? Is anyone going to, I mean, for all we know, the species might not even be in existence. I don't,
mm,
I just stop myself and say, no one's going to care in 50 years about this moment. So
mm.
why are you doing this to yourself? And for me, that works. It may not work for everybody, but I just stop myself like, no one's going to give a rip a few generations from now. So don't do this to yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a good perspective. By day, I'm a leadership advisor. I place executives, I coach executives, and I'd say, 99.9% of them, and I'm talking people at the C-suite, I'm talking CEOs, everyone, board members, they have or have had illustrious careers. It feels like to me you had multiple careers, but these days this is much more of a calling. You're 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 not just treating animals, Quan, you're advocating for the voiceless, human and animal. Was curious how you see it.
I, this this little tiny mission that started out just caring for this pet need has turned into knowing and understanding this demographic, this population of people that many times are unseen and people don't understand and are quick to judge and trying to understand them and advocate for them. And now, Glenn, it's really turned into a movement, if I could call it that, of kindness, which is something that's sorely lacking in our world today.
Mm,
I feel like empathy, in fact, is under attack. It is under attack by the richest man in the world, by the way.
hmm Yep.
And it's sad to see that empathy is seen as a weakness or a bad thing, or compassion or kindness is. That's what makes us human, actually. And if I can bring a dose of that to the forefront and have people understand it through my stories and my work, then I've done something because it does need to come back. It is separating us and dividing us. And again, at our basic core, just finding your own 7-Eleven moment, 5 minutes of your time can change someone's life. It really can. And you don't have to start a charity, and you don't have to start doing something every day and walking the streets. It is sometimes as simple as offering help to your neighbor, or talking to someone on a corner who's in a bad place, like an unhoused person who just wants to be seen. They don't always want your money. Sometimes they just want to know they're still part of the human race and part of society, and just talking to them like a human is helpful. So yes, that I feel like that will be the legacy of all this when it's said and done, is just showing kindness to other people. And when I on my lecture tour around the country, it's now gone international, that is what I touch on the most, is
Mm.
showing a little kindness and compassion to another human being.
Yeah. Well, speaking of kindness, so you won this CNN Hero of the Year award in 2023, and I think a lot of people know about it, but you're amongst some incredible humans, all magnanimous in their own ways, doing incredible things to further society, and you win it. And right there at your acceptance speech, it's $100,000 prize, I believe. And certainly you earned that prize, but you decided right there, I don't know if that was live or recorded, but that you would split that prize 10 ways with all the runner-ups.
Yeah.
I practically broke down in tears. It was such an incredible gesture. What was behind that?
I think I blacked out for a moment there when I was at the podium. I joke about that. It was live, and my speech was not rehearsed because it was like the Oscar moment. Nobody knew who was going to win. Anderson Cooper opens the card and says, "This year's winner is," and called my name. And in that moment, you take this sort of trophy, I guess. You go up and you give a little speech, and I was just off the cuff.
Hmm.
And I'd gotten to know the other 9 finalists over the course of those previous 2 days very well, and they were remarkable people. They're doing grassroots work for years, sacrificing their own time and money, and sometimes struggling to do it. Helping the poor, providing education, restoring the coral reef, on and on. And I was in awe of them. And I just thought, you know what? I just want to share it with you guys. I just want to honor you and let you know I respect, and you've moved me, you've inspired me, and we're a family now. So I just, yeah, sorry, splits evenly 10 ways pretty nicely. So let's just chop it up and go celebrate. And we did.
It was amazing. I'm sure completely shocked CNN as well, and Cooper and all of that. I don't think it's ever happened before, so that was really neat. Uh, Quan, I wrap up always with this question. Maybe you know it. If you don't, you'll know it now. But the podcast is called The Art of Excellence, and I like to hear how the guest I have on the show define the word excellence. So you think of that word, what comes to mind?
We all carry talents, uh, and in some cases, those talents rise to the level of a gift or genius level gift. But we are all good at something, and the best part of life is the exploration or discovery of what that is, and then using it to the benefit of yourself and the rest of the people living around you. And if you can find it, tap into it, and share it, then you have done probably the most remarkable thing you can do while spending your time on this planet. And for me, I was a veterinarian, and I had this education, I had this ability and this authority and this license. And caring for pets that's what I did. It was transactional though. I'd go in and I'd give care and someone would pay me, I'd go home. But then the day I discovered I could do it without agenda or expectation, that was the moment of excellence. That's when I discovered and realized doing it for passion, not for pay, it unlocked something in me that I didn't know was there.
Mm.
And again, I don't know that it always has to be in a charitable act necessarily. Doing it transactional is fine, but again, when you tap into that thing you're good at, you enjoy doing, and it benefits others, that's the magic. That's the magic. Before you let me go, Glenn, there was a quick story I have to tell, and this is just a tease, I know, but there was this
Yeah,
very cool
please.
story on set with Brad Pitt. Yeah, so going back to my movie days,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and there's a nugget at the core of the story. But I was on set with Brad Pitt, and I'm not going to embellish. We're not buddies. We didn't exchange numbers or anything.
You're not going to
Uh,
help get him on the podcast?
no, I can't call him
Ah,
up and
son
say,
of
Brad, I did this really cool podcast with Glenn. But I was on the set of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And for those that saw the movie, it's a Tarantino movie. There was a scene where the pit bull like chews out the crotch of this thief that's trying to rob Brad's character. And Brad sticks his dog on this dude, and rah, 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 it's a very gruesome
mm,
scene. I was on set
mhm.
that day. The pit bull couldn't have been a nicer, the sweetest thing. She was the sweetest thing. But during the resetting of every scene, it's and being on a movie set's a lot of hurry up and wait. It's like they film the scene for a minute or two, and then they reset the lights, and sometimes the cameras that takes 30 minutes. During the reset, Brad, for whatever reason, decided to stand next to me, shoulder to shoulder. I'd never seen Brad in person before. So I remember as he's walking towards me, I just thought, "All right, that's Brad Pitt." And we kind of did this. He didn't. We didn't say hi to each other because there's this very strict set etiquette. You don't talk to the A-listers, right? It's like they're working. Don't acknowledge them. Don't say I'm a fan. You just like you're like a ghost. But as he's walking towards me, we kind of did the bro nod, like, all right, like two bulls entering each other's space. And then he just decided to stand right next to me.
Yeah.
And I'm side eyeing him for a long time, up and down, like, all right, I just kind of sizing him up. And I remember having two thoughts as he stood next to me. And this went on for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. But I had two immediate thoughts. The first was I could take you if I had to. I just thought,
Huh.
like, if you press up on me, bro, I'm a little bigger than you. And I don't know why I had that thought, but it's something primal,
Yeah.
like, some
Yeah.
guy thing, like, all right, man, you're in my space. If I had to, I could take. The truth is, I probably couldn't. He's been like expertly trained in every martial art. In fact, he was playing a stuntman in this movie that beat up Bruce Lee. That was his character. So no, I probably can't beat up Brad Pitt. And then the second thought was like, you are a good looking guy. Like you really are a good looking guy, but I can take you. Now, so moments later, Brad was off talking to his assistant about a dog, and I think it was his dog, and he was gushing on this dog. Like, yeah, I just can't, I get home and she runs up to me and I couldn't see him, but I could hear him. And I just thought it was really cool. Like he wasn't Brad Pitt. He was just a guy like gushing on his dog. So then fast forward 2 hours. We wrapped early on set. I got in my car. I had my bag packed. I drove straight to Skid Row. I had some daylight left. So I decided to walk the streets. Walking the streets, I come across this man. I sit down, I treat his dog. And in the course of treating his dog, I recall, and this is the cool part, I recall as I'm not even looking at the man because I'm giving attention to the dog, almost like I was closing my eyes. As he was gushing on his dog, he sounded exactly like Brad Pitt, in style and tone, just two
Mm,
guys gushing on their dog. And a man whose name you will never know in this very neat moment sounded like maybe one of the most famous people on the planet. But to me, they were the exact same guy. And that moment was very special to me, not because it was Brad Pitt, just because it reminds us how pets reduce us to just people,
mm,
right? We're just in in their presence when we love them and care for them, and they love us. We're just like I don't know, a human being with this amazing bond with this other creature, and it couldn't have played out in a more strong way or memorable way than it did with Brad on set and then this guy out in the streets. And I just love that. It's just remarkable to me because again, as I talk about the bond and the relationship, that is it. That is it at sort of the coolest and neatest level. So I like to end with that sometimes because at the end of the day, I'm just a guy out in the streets caring for pets and absorbing and taking on these really cool stories and feeling immense gratitude for doing it. But in turn, I'm eternally grateful
mm.
for the time and experiences I've had with these folks.
Yeah. By the way, when you got in the video call for this interview and you saw me for the first time, did, were you like, wait, Brad
I
Pitt?
and I had the same two thoughts. Uh,
It's a good story. Well, look, if 7-year-old Kwan having just finished the Black Stallion, could see future Kwan doing what you're doing, that little kid would be so proud. I couldn't think of a more aspirational way to take everything you've learned and apply it to a way to benefit society in a huge way. And I'm glad you're finding a way to amplify the efforts. And I'm picky on the people I have on the podcast. I've been really interested in having you on for some time, so I'm glad we can make this work. I love what you're doing. Thank God people like you exist in the world. And thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for sharing your story with me and with my audience.
Thank you. I enjoyed it, and I'm the lucky one. I really am. Um, you know, to have found my calling and to have been on this really cool journey and to be able to share it has it really is the it is the thing that stuff that dreams are made of. So yeah, 7-year-old Kwan would be pretty happy.